Hi everyone, Sam here. Welcome to my YouTube channel. The channel is called SPGD and it focuses on tabletop games design. In this video, we're going to do a deep dive into Spearhead for Age of Sigmar, which is a game I designed while I worked at Games Workshop. See you after the jump. Okay, so up until about 6 months ago, I was working in the design studio at Games Workshop. I worked there for around 7.5 years, predominantly as a games designer. As you might imagine, it was tons and tons of fun. This video is the first in a series where I plan to look back at some of the games that I worked on while I was in the studio, and in this video it's going to be Age of Sigmar Spearhead. As the focus of this channel is games design, we're going to be looking at the rules and the mechanics of Spearhead first and foremost, and we're not really going to be exploring the other areas like background, miniature design, product design, things like that, unless it has some sort of impact on the games design. Also, I mentioned this in my intro video, but I think it's worthwhile saying again here, while I will be critiquing the games design of various Warhammer games in my videos, in this video, Spearhead, I love Warhammer in all of its guises, and I look back on my time in the studio very, very fondly. So overall, this channel is going to be a place that celebrates Warhammer, and it's going to be very, very positive in tone. Basically, if you love Warhammer, this is the right place to be. So for Spearhead, while I certainly think it has some flaws, overall it is a design that I'm very, very proud of. When you're working in a studio as a games designer, just because you believe in a design doesn't necessarily mean the wider community are going to adopt it or it's going to resonate with them in the same way. But as soon as I started seeing thumbnails like this one, I knew that the reaction was going to be a good one. This thumbnail in particular really made me laugh. Like, I get the joke. The rules writers at Games Workshop are all meant to be terrible at their jobs. And a quick shout out to Jay and Eons of Battle. I really like your guys' content. Spearhead released alongside 4th edition Age of Sigmar last summer, and it is the new small format quick gameplay mode, suitable for newbies, busy dads, busy mums, players who want to collect many smaller armies wide not deep, and for players who just want a quick game from time to time. So I led the design of Spearhead right from its initial prototyping through to its final release, and I designed many of its key elements, things like the boards, the cards, and so on, although I didn't work on the expansion that's just come out for it. Okay, let's begin with a quick rundown of how Spearhead works and how it is different to regular Age of Sigmar. Spearhead is a game format for Age of Sigmar 4th edition, and by that I mean it takes the core rules of the game and adds on some extra features to make a tailored experience. And that tailored experience is one for battles small in size and quick to play. It caters for beginners especially, but should be enjoyable no matter your experience or skill level. It has a number of differences to regular Age of Sigmar, and the first comes with army selection. Each player commands an army in battle, much like the regular Age of Sigmar game, but the armies themselves are much smaller than a standard army, usually consisting of a single hero and 2 to 3 other units, rather than the dozen or so you would normally see. In addition, rather than building your own army from a vast selection of units, each faction in the game instead comes with predetermined army lists. For example, say I like the Ideneth Deepkin, who are morally grey sea elves with a combination of Atlantean and Cthulhu themes. Instead of picking any combination from the units they have available, I instead need to pick the units that are in their Spearhead army, and these all happen to be sold in a bundle box together, go figure. Each of these sets comes with a full Spearhead force ready to play straight out of the box. Well, you do need to model and paint them, of course. Now onto the game itself. As mentioned before, Spearhead is based on the core rules of Warhammer Age of Sigmar, which means most of the rules stay the same. Battles are fought between 2 players, they take it in turns to move, shoot and fight with their units in the same way as the regular game, and after the battle ends, which is 4 battle rounds in Spearhead or 4 turns each, whichever player has the most victory points is declared the winner. But there are some key differences to the battles as well. Firstly, it is fought on a special battlefield, just a quarter of the size of a regular Age of Sigmar battlefield. This battlefield measures only 30 inches by 22 inches in size. Furthermore, the battlefield is double-sided, with each side representing one of the different magical realms of Age of Sigmar's world. Here, one side represents Ghyran, the verdant realm of life, and the other Akshi, the volatile realm of fire. The side of the battlefield you fight on will have an impact on that battle. Each side features a different configuration of stone daises, and these are the objectives that you fight over. You'll score up to 3 victory points at the end of your turn if you control 1, multiple, and more than your opponent. There are also 2 card decks used in Spearhead, and this is where the fun really begins. Firstly, there are the battle tactic cards. Each player has an identical deck of 12. You'll draw cards until you have a hand of 3 at the start of every round. The battle tactic cards have 2 parts to them. At the top is the battle tactic. This gives you a little mission to try and pull off in the battle, and at the end of your turn you can score any of them that are in your hand for which you have met the criteria. Alternatively, each card has an underside, the command ability. These are powerful boons you can use mid-game, and as your hand is hidden from your opponent, it can be quite the surprise, helping you turn the tide of battle or stay in the fight. However, it comes at a cost. Using a command ability burns the card, as I like to say, meaning you cannot score the victory point from its battle tactic on top if you do so. This means if you ever find yourself with a mission you cannot score, the command ability can help keep you in the game. However, at other times you have a difficult choice to make, using the command ability to strengthen your position but sacrificing potential victory points as you do so. I mentioned there are 2 decks. The second deck of cards are called the twist cards. These are themed to each side of the board, so you get one set for the realm of life and another for the realm of fire. And rather than being cards that the players draw, instead one card is drawn at the start of each round to add an environmental twist, such as healing rain or an exploding objective. Now, these cards call out something called the underdog. This is the player who has fewer victory points going into the round. These cards will often give the underdog a boost in some way or give them the choice in how the effect is applied. This means the twist cards add both an unpredictable nature to the game but also serve as a catch-up mechanic too. So Spearhead is far from the first attempt at a small format game. It's a long-standing tradition now, and there have been many of them over the years for Warhammer 40,000 and its fantasy equivalents. If you wanted to trace them all the way back, you could probably go as far as the Warband rules in Realm of Chaos, but that's probably a bit too far back, as that's before the flagship games Warhammer 40,000 and Fantasy Battle had become fully fledged games rather than rule sets. So I would probably trace back their origin to 40k in 40 minutes instead. 40k in 40 minutes first appeared in White Dwarf issue 274, released back in October 2002. They were a set of rules developed by teacher Tim Eagling for his school club, and essentially they were a set of restrictions. If you were into the hobby at the time, I'm sure you will remember some of them. The points limit was set to 400. You must include 1 troops choice. You were limited to just 1 HQ. No special characters or characters with more than 2 wounds. No units with a 2+ save characteristic, so no Terminators. And vehicles could not have a combined armor characteristic of 33. Remember, this was when vehicles had different armor values on their front, their sides, and their rear, so you would add them all together and make sure it didn't exceed 33. Now, for its time, this was a really fun little rule set, and I think that's because it understood a core problem with playing Warhammer 40k at small points values and tried to address that problem. And that problem is regular games of 40k and Age of Sigmar and Fantasy just are not fun at smaller points values. And the heart of the problem lies with how the power of units and rules are scaled and how that breaks when the games are downsized. Both Warhammer 40k and Age of Sigmar have a standard army size of 2,000 points, and on average a 2,000 point army contains around 10 units, and a unit can be anything from a Space Marine captain to an Empire battle wizard to a block of troops, say 10 Space Marines or 20 Clan Rats, all the way through to larger things like a tank, like a Land Raider, or monsters like a Vampire Lord on Zombie Dragon. When it comes to the more powerful units such as monsters, tanks, special characters, and elite units like Terminators, well, they are prime targets in those larger games, and as such they are built to weather the attacks of multiple enemy units before they can eventually be killed. They also dish out lots and lots of damage, so even if they are brought down quickly, they get to make an impact on the game. And this is important for making these units work in standard size battles. The problem is, when you downscale the size of the game, those units quickly become overbearing. I remember in the early days of Age of Sigmar looking at reports of 500 point battles being played online, and the winning list would usually be something like 2 units of direwolves led by a Vampire Lord on Zombie Dragon. The 2 units of direwolves would just be there as the battle line tax back in, say, 2nd edition, and they would be to stand on objectives, and the Vampire Lord on Zombie Dragon, that itself would be enough to take on the entirety of the opponent's army, quickly overwhelm it and just go go on this massive killing spree. Not really very fun to face against. So the game is not fun when taken as is and simply played at smaller points values. Now this is a tricky problem for the growth of the game. The nature of the hobby means that players often start with small armies while they build up to a full-size game, so creating a good format has always been one of the design goals for the flagship games. So when designing a small format game mode for a game like Warhammer 40,000 or Age of Sigmar, you need to think about this issue and how to solve it. For 40k in 40 minutes, the solution was through list building restrictions, essentially banning a lot of units from the game. Now, when Spearhead was first planned out, a core aspect from the start was going to be the complete forces contained within the box sets. Something like this isn't decided by the games designer, but by the product developer, who is thinking about the overall strategy of the game and the customer experience. I'm sure you can agree that being able to say to any new player, pick any of these boxes, it has everything you need to play inside and will give you a good engaging battle against any of these other boxes, is a very, very powerful message. It did mean, however, that when we came to designing Spearhead, we couldn't rely on our old tricks of using list building restrictions to help and try balance out the small format. So this is where I turned to something called negative feedback loops to try and balance the game. Okay, so what are feedback loops? Well, before I give my own explanation, I will give a quick shout out to another games design channel that I am a big fan of, and that is Mark Brown's Game Maker's Toolkit, or GMTK. He has an excellent video on feedback loops, and while the channel is focused on video games design, the lessons can be applied equally to tabletop games design. Indeed, it was his video that helped me contextualize them, so check out his video and channel after you have finished watching this video, link in the description below. So feedback loops exist in all games. Sometimes they occur naturally out of its core mechanics, and sometimes they are deliberate systems added to a game. Simply put, a feedback loop refers to any situation where the output goes on to inform the input. For example, in 40k or Age of Sigmar, unit destruction is a naturally occurring feedback loop. On your turn, if you manage to destroy a significant amount of your opponent's units, on their turn, they will have less firepower to retaliate with, meaning you take fewer losses in return, and then back on your next turn, you will be able to deal a stronger counterattack once more. So here the feedback loop compounds the situation, putting one player into what is commonly referred to as a death spiral. Another example, this time of a deliberate feedback loop, is the glory mechanic in Warhammer Underworlds. You earn glory for completing objectives and killing your opponent's fighters. This glory is a currency you can use to spend on upgrading your fighters mid-battle. Now, spending glory doesn't reduce your total. Every glory point should be spent if you can. This system creates a satisfying play loop that rewards players trying to score early and capitalize upon it. Feedback loops can be characterized into two different types: positive feedback loops and negative feedback loops. Positive feedback loops are when a success in a game leads to more successes, or when a failure leads to more failures. This means both death spirals and win more situations are positive feedback loops. Now, it's important to stress that positive feedback loops are not inherently good or bad. It depends on the situation. So on the one hand, while it can be frustrating for a player to get caught in a death spiral, they can also reward skilled play in a way that is very satisfying. Furthermore, they are very good at bringing a game to a decisive end. As soon as one player takes the lead, they're able to build upon that victory, compound it, and win the game. So what about negative feedback loops? Negative feedback loops, on the other hand, seek to undermine successes or help balance out failures. As Mark Brown puts it in his video, negative feedback loops strive to counteract changes and always keep things in equilibrium. The example everyone uses is Mario Kart, more specifically the power-up distribution. In Mario Kart, the closer you are to first place, the worse the items you receive become, whereas the most powerful items, such as the blue shell, are only handed out to players near the back of the pack. You can find these in tabletop wargames too. For example, the original Necromunda game in 1995 rewarded weaker gangs during the campaign with bonus experience and bonus credits in the form of the Underdog bonus and the Giant Killer bonus. In addition, the more powerful and numerous a gang became, the fewer credits it would receive from its income due to the tax table. You can find them across all games, in fact, even hiding in unlikely places. For example, Monopoly, the game seemingly built on nothing but positive feedback loops, has this little blue shell hiding in its community chest, the housing repairs. As with positive feedback loops, negative feedback loops are not inherently good or bad. It again depends on the situation, and they have pros and cons. On the one hand, they can stop runaway leaders, but on the other hand, they can drag out and prolong a game, denying it of a satisfying conclusion. Additionally, while they can help keep lower skilled players in the game, sometimes more skilled players can feel robbed of their victories by the mechanics. Lastly, they can promote some really weird behaviours sometimes. If the incentives are too strong, you might find players deliberately trying to lose the game, especially in the early stages, so that they can secure some sort of power-up to use in the later stages. Ultimately, I decided that negative feedback loops would be the best tool for Spearhead, and that's because, despite their weaknesses, they offered the following. Firstly, they would ensure the game is better for newer players and for players of varying skill levels facing each other, because it wouldn't compound successes with more successes, and it wouldn't compound failures with more failures. This means if there are some natural advantages one side has over the other due to the asymmetry, negative feedback loops can help mitigate them. It would make the game much less punishing on mistakes. Secondly, because negative feedback loops always strive to keep the equilibrium, they can be used as a tool for balancing the game. It's on that second point where you can see how positive feedback loops and negative feedback loops fundamentally differ. Positive feedback loops, by their very nature, unbalance a game as the game pans out. They do this by compounding the successes and compounding the failures. Negative feedback loops, on the other hand, because they keep both losers and winners in check and they always strive for the equilibrium, they can be used as a tool to help balance a game. This was crucial for Spearhead because a big part of the game's structure are these predetermined armies, and we were not able to use points in army building to help balance them like we normally would. So what are the negative feedback loops that I used in Spearhead? Well, the most obvious one are the twist cards and the underdog system, but these aren't the only negative feedback loops. In the end, I tried to squeeze them in wherever I could, and I'll pick out some of the not so obvious ones in a moment. To talk about the twist cards quickly, they give the underdog a very specific bonus in most cases, and that means this is a very overt negative feedback loop. With these sorts of negative feedback loops, I think it's important that there is a random element to them, much like the power-ups in Mario Kart. Because the twist cards are randomly drawn, you can never rely on exactly which one you're going to receive. That's also why there are more twist cards than there are turns in the game, to keep players guessing right through to the end. Now, I didn't keep tabs on competitive 40k in 4th edition, as I had already moved over to the 40k team by the time it came out. I do remember the first season, the General's Handbook, there were specific bonuses for the underdog tied to each battle plan. I remember at the time my worry was that this would encourage players to deliberately try and seek those bonuses. It would encourage them to play strangely, trying to lose. I'll be interested in knowing how that panned out, so if you played that first season, let me know in the comments below. The second negative feedback loop is the battle tactics / command abilities. The fact that you cannot use them and score victory points generally means players caught in a bad situation can use the commands to get back into the game, while those winning are doing so by scoring points from the tactics and not using the command abilities themselves. As with twist cards, adding a random nature to these by making them cards you draw instead of options you can simply pick, again, helps keep the game a bit more casual and beginner friendly by lowering the overall skill ceiling. Another negative feedback loop to call out is the reinforcement system. Certain units are marked as reinforcements and can return to the battlefield as a fresh unit after being destroyed. Firstly, we were able to apply this in a selective way, only making weaker forces have units that are reinforcements to begin with. But it also works as a natural negative feedback loop, because once the battle is underway, you only get to bring back a fresh unit if the first one has been destroyed in the first place. Okay, so here I've shown how we employed negative feedback loops in many different places inside Spearhead to use as a tool to balance the game. But there are lots of inherent positive feedback loops inside Warhammer Age of Sigmar and inside Spearhead. So the other side of the game's design was set about trying to mitigate those positive feedback loops as much as possible. I mentioned this at the start of the video, but the big Warhammer battle games, so Warhammer 40,000 and Age of Sigmar, because of the amounts of units that you have on the board and the I go, you go turn structure, so one player getting to activate all of their units followed by their opponent activating with theirs, this has an inbuilt positive feedback loop, which is the unit destruction. If you're able to destroy a large amount of your opponent's force in your turn, they have much less to retaliate with, meaning that more of your force survives intact, and then going into the next turn you're able to punish them even further. In actual fact, it's a little bit worse than that as well, because it's amplified by the objectives. In Age of Sigmar, when you destroy an opponent's unit, you often do so on the objectives. So not only do they lose the firepower to retaliate with, you are standing on the objectives and they are off. So for this reason, many of the battle tactics in Age of Sigmar Spearhead are actually designed in a way to promote you not fighting. They're encouraging you to disengage from your opponent, to retreat or go somewhere else on the battlefield. Now, Warhammer games are games about brutal warfare. They're not games about rainbows and friendship. So you need to tread really, really carefully here. But we were able to frame these cards so it still sounded like your units were doing something Warhammery, even though they weren't fighting. So for example, Raid. With this card, a unit needs to be in enemy territory but not in combat, the idea being that they are looting and pillaging. Another example is this card, Take Without Warning. Here you need to capture an enemy objective without fighting over it, but it's framed in a way to make it seem like you've unleashed this cunning surprise plan upon your opponent. Okay, so that brings us to the end of today's video. Now there are certainly more things I could talk about with regards to Spearhead, but I didn't want the video to get too long. And I thought looking at this idea of feedback loops, of positive feedback loops and negative feedback loops, was hopefully an interesting one, and gave you a bit of insight not only into how Spearhead was designed, but how it attempts to solve some of the problems that plague small format games. Ultimately, I think how successful Spearhead was at fixing those problems is something I'll leave up to you guys to decide, but I will say I think Spearhead has been the most well received of our small format games in recent times, and that's something that I'm really proud of. And I would say a big reason to its popularity is how it utilizes feedback loops, how it tries to put negative feedback loops in wherever possible and also mitigate positive feedback loops. And that's not because negative feedback loops are bad and positive feedback loops are good. It's because in the context of Spearhead, it was best served by maximizing those negative feedback loops. Spearhead is an asymmetrical game that doesn't have any army building or any points. So the negative feedback loops were a great tool at being able to add balance into a game that otherwise wouldn't have any. And combining this with mitigating positive feedback loops wherever possible helped keep the game casual and beginner friendly, because it allows two players of varying skill level to face off against each other and have a close match. Usually Spearhead battles are decided in the final round. That's definitely not to say the game is perfect and without flaws, because that's not the case at all. While it tries to have this robust system that can cater for any of the Spearhead forces within it, there are times when it's still been pushed to breaking point. The Ogre Moor tribes have had to have an errata to tone them down, and on the flip side, to this day, I still regret how weak the Cities of Sigmar one became in its final draft. But if you have played Spearhead, I would love to know your experiences with it, so let me know down in the comments below. I would love to hear feedback on this video too. I tried to make it as informative and as useful as I could for anybody looking to get into tabletop games design, but I also hope it was an interesting watch if you're just a keen Warhammer player, you're into Age of Sigmar, you're into Spearhead. If there were any other elements or things that you wish I'd spoken more of, please let me know. Alright, I'll be back for another video next week, so make sure you subscribe if you're keen to see that. A like will also go a long way to supporting the channel grow and is much, much appreciated. Otherwise, until next time, bye for now.